So good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. I am Federica Dossi, and I will be moderating today's event. So we are gathered here in Brussels today and online to hear directly from Maasai representatives about the negative impacts that soil carbon projects are having in northern Tanzania. This event has been co-organized by Carbon Market Watch, which is a Brussels-based NGO that focuses on climate advocacy, and by the MISA Alliance, the Maasai International Solidarity Alliance. The goal of the MISA Alliance is to end human rights violations against the Maasai people. And we will begin our event today with a panel featuring our 3 Maasai representatives that I'm very pleased to introduce you now. So we have Nalsinkoi Lekakeni and Naimpanoi Ntutu, who are Maasai activists, and they are members of the MISA Alliance. And then we have Joseph Moses Ole Shanghai, who is a human rights lawyer and activist, and who has represented the Maasai people in more than 10 cases in both regional and national courts. So to start our discussion, I would like to turn to you, Mazingoi, and I would like you to tell us more about the Maasai way of life. I know the Maasai are traditionally pastoralists, so yeah, I would like to ask you if you could briefly introduce us to pastoralism.
Thank you so much, Federica. Am I audible now? Thank you so much, Federica, for that question. Pastoralism is a way of life that is centered in herding of nomadic livestock. Pastoralism to us, the Maasai, it's not only herding or keeping livestock, but it is identity, it is culture, it is spiritual, it is bonded to every aspect of the Maasai life. Just to briefly explain, we have the trinity of pastoralism. The trinity of pastoralism is livestock, land, and people. Without the existence of these 3 people, that is the trinity, the whole trinity, then pastoralism becomes vague. How are we related to land, and how are we related to livestock? How are we related to people? Land is the major factor that keeps livestock and pastoralism going. How? Without land, we will not be able to keep our livestock in this aspect. Land is where we get the grazing areas for our livestock. Land is where we get the water points for our animals, for our livestock. Land is where we get the salt licks and minerals for our livestock. Land is where our trees for our sacred and spiritual life grow. It is where we have the bond between the Maasai and the mother, that is the motherland. In the land, that is where we get our herbs. Our herbs grow from the land. That is where we get the medicine for our children, for our people, for our livestock. Then livestock, it's our identity. Every Maasai needs to have livestock to become a full Maasai. Without livestock, then you cannot sell if this person a Maasai or this person is not a Maasai. Why? Because before a child is born and during the birth of the child, we use the cow to identify what type of a child the mother is carrying in her womb. Through livestock, that is where we know that I can say we have the blood transfusion. For us, we use you have to you strike the jugular vein of a livestock to get the blood to give the woman who just delivered, who put to bed, to recover the blood lost during the pregnancy. We use the hides and the skin as our beddings. We use the skin for our shoes. We use the skin for our rituals and everything. Then that is why we say our livestock is everything. Then another thing about our livestock, we use them for our economic activities. We sell our livestock to get money, to take our children to school. We use livestock to barter, to barter trade, to get cereals, to get everything that we want. Then when you take away a livestock from the Maasai, then automatically you are killing that Maasai. Then we have people, and the people, it's us, the Maasai. We are the custodian of land, we are the custodian of this livestock. So, according to the Trinity, I think I've explained a little bit about it in a nutshell. Then we have I said we have the nomadic nature, but our nomadic nature, it's not an haphazard movement or anything. It is a strategic mobility that we move from one place to another in response to different climatic conditions, in response to what minerals our cows need to get in what particular time, in response of diseases. We know what time and when do we have to check our livestock in this particular area so that they cannot contaminate this disease from wildlife or anything. I will give an example. In Ngorongoro, where it is also a conservation area, we have the wild beasts. And it is proven by our indigenous knowledge that existed in so many years that from December to April 14, 15, and climax is 16, that is when the wildlife, the wild beasts, have given birth and they are moving. So from December to April, we are not supposed to graze where the wild beasts are. We give them this transition period for them to give birth and move from May. Then from May, that is when our livestock will go and feed and graze where the wild beasts were. Why? The reason is when a wild beast give birth, the amniotic fluid that lies in the grass, it will bring a disease that is called malaria to our cow. Therefore, we know how to deal with it, and we know how to prevent them from interacting with the wild beast. Thank you. I think for a nutshell, that is enough.
Thank you so much. I think, yeah, that's a very important context, and I think you highlighted very well how also embedded your way of life is in the environment where you live. And next, I would like to turn to you, Naipanoi. So I know that NISA has been working and researching and investigating these carbon projects. And I know that the results of this investigation and work has given birth to a report that NISA published. I know you worked on it, and I think before we go to see to discuss what the results of this research is, I think I wanted to ask you why first you began working on this. Why did NISA start researching this project?
Thank you so much, Federica, for that wonderful question. And I am going to answer my question into two parts. I am going to explain the reason of developing the Maasai conservation vision, and the second part, I am going to explain the research discovery, what we discovered. In July 2024, we wanted to develop the Maasai conservation vision because our community was already facing so many challenges, such as forest conservation, hunting, forced eviction and tourism development. That was the reason we wanted to have our own vision, the Maasai conservation vision. Therefore, we wanted to promote our own alternative solutions led by the Maasai people rather than imposed from outside. So during the research, we got so many questions from the communities asking about carbon credit. What is carbon credit? The community were trying to explain to us that we have these proponents coming to us. They want us to accept carbon credit business so that it can be implemented in our communities. So we got curious as the researchers, and we wanted to know more about carbon credit. And we did another research, the second one, that we found out that there are two proponents who are coming to the Maasai territories, which are Soil for the Future, which is funded by Volkswagen, and we have the Nature Conservancy, that is TNC, which is a conservancy organization. So after founding the two proponents, which is Soil for the Future and TNC, we found that both of them, they wanted to implement the soil carbon in our land. And so we were curious and wanted to understand what is soil carbon. And we found that soil carbon is soil carbon about the soil carbon projects, changing the way of life used by grazing. They wanted to change our way of grazing so that more carbon is stored underground in the soil. This means that the two proponents will focus on controlling our way of life. How many cattle can we graze? Where the grazing happens? And it will just contradict with our traditional way of life. Yeah.
Thank you, Naipanoi. I think you explained very well that these projects that we're talking about, they are soil carbon projects. So I think a lot of the times we hear from forestry projects, but we'll keep in mind that this is a different type of activity. And I will go to you, Joseph, maybe to go into more detail on this. So how do these projects impact the way of life of the Maasai people? What are these project proponents asking the communities to do?
Okay, thank you very much, Federica, and good morning, everyone. And so, which I will actually supplement what my colleague has said. When now, after learning existence of the carbon project, and after studying, we had, of course, to interview the people and, of course, studying some of the contract. That's how we can learn what are they asking. The first things I can say we were able to understand of their ask is that they want to change what my colleague said, to change how pastoralism function. By this, because they have their own ideas of what they call additionality. So they want to create what they call additionality. And in their formula is, you have to keep rotating for 14 days in a contract of 40 years. So it's like a very crazy movement all around. That's one. So they want to change from the strategic mobility that she said earlier of understanding the climate, understanding the disease, understanding the nature of the environment, to a 14 days interval movement, which will not understand where is the disease is when. But second, they were telling the community that they want to contract that in your grazing patterns, you should never graze below that the grass goes below 10 centimeters. That again is very crazy, because are we going for measurements in measuring? And it's very important to understand pastoralism, not only in Tanzania, around the world, mostly happened in one of the most dry areas. So whether you are grazing or no, maybe the grasses are not going above 10 centimeter. So what happens if, for example, there is drought and different other things? But the other things that the proponent are asking is, now that you are contracting, because they contract the village government and of course the district council and then some channel of government, they say, the Maasai, the other person said, we are communal society. We access resources, land, which is very central, as the whole community. So they are saying, whoever contracts should not allow the other people to enter the carbon area. So what does this mean? It's not a small ask, because usually, villages, governments are, very recent things. We have our traditional system of grazing, of sharing resources together. So the proponents are saying now, if one village contracts carbon, then should not allow others to enter the carbon area. Because for them, there is something they call leakage, like leakage in, leakage out. So they control access of other villages outside, which again, for our people is bad, because though there are village boundaries which are political, as a community we are one. And sometimes our grazing resources, our grazing area is one, irrespective of which village this is. And again, the proposal is 40 years. And actually some says is 30 years plus 10, which actually explain is 40 years, which in our perspective, if you go maybe here in Europe, life expectancy of the people is around 80, sometimes 80 something. In Tanzania, at least, is around 60 or so. So when you say you contract for 40 years, that's the life of a person. So it's like we are shifting the burden from us who are contracting to our children who are coming, which is not a good idea, at least the way the community are in our findings. But again, the other things that they ask is, because after contracting, there is a control of the land. So like we are shifting the control of the land from the community to the carbon proponent. So it is them who decide. So it is a kind of a colonization through the new theories that says you have to keep, because the assumption is the Maasai do not rotate. So it's like they're introduced. But my colleague said, it's not crazy that way, but we have a strategic mobility. We are mobile for a reason. That, what she said about the land is very central. You need space to be able to move, but you move because of factors. Is it the disease now are so common in one area? You have to shift places where there are no disease. And is it not like we need the natural minerals for the livestock? We move temporarily for that area. Is it the wildebeest coming? We have to leave a space for that. This carbon idea will not understand this, and so this, I think, briefly is what they're asking. Is a number of issues that will not work in the way pastoralism has been working for centuries.
Thank you. Yeah, I think they're asking a lot, and they're basically putting in danger, right, your way of life. They're putting in danger your livestock, the livestock survival, and therefore just the survival of the traditions and the survival of the Maasai people themselves. I would go back to you, Nazengoy. So I think we can stay on talking about the impacts of this project. So if these projects will start and these changes are implemented, what are the anticipated impacts for the communities at the communities level of these projects?
Thank you, Federica. Then we'll start by this. As much as we are trying to make this world a better place for everyone, and all these decisions are made through different international and global forums. We expect that all international rules and regulations should complement each other. But in this aspect, we see that this law contradicts with the Article 8 of the UNDRIP United Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People, which states that Indigenous people have the right not to be forcefully assimilated in their ways of life or anything related to their knowledge. Therefore, the anticipated impact are, first of all, the destruction of the Indigenous people's knowledge. That is our Indigenous knowledge of strategic mobility. Second, we will lose the communal land that we used to share. Therefore, when we lose this land that we communally used to share, this brings about the divide and rule, which will be a gap for whoever who wants to distract the Maasai community can use in any way. That is, maybe the government is trying to use that, or for the carbon proponent, either knowingly or unknowingly, is paving way for that. And we expect that the Indigenous people will remain in their land with no distraction whatsoever. Then it will bring conflict between these two villages, the ones that have signed for and the ones who have not signed for. It will also bring the economic impact. For what my colleague has mentioned, that we have this paddock movement or whatever. In one paddock, you have to keep like a number of cows, not more than 250 cows. And traditionally, we own more than 300 cows per person. Then, remember, this is a community land. One person has 300 cows. Another person has 300 cows. Where do we expect this person to graze? We will bring, for congesting this livestock in one place, maybe they might bring the additionality, but then they will die because the grazing land is not enough for them. When they die, we will not have any economic impact, any economic, any financial impact, because we have to sell them to get money. And if all of them die, then what will happen? Then we will go back and degrade the UNDRIP by reducing or declining or making sure that these Indigenous people do not exist at all. All this is because of what? Climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we all know who is responsible for that. Yeah, that's yeah, extremely worrying. And yeah, I really hope that this can be avoided. So given I think we now understand that these projects would have disastrous impact on the Maasai communities, right? And so but there are villages that are signing these contracts. And so, yeah, I want to ask you, Naitanoi, do you think that the people that sign these projects, do you think they are aware of the scale of the potential consequences? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the villages, I'm going to talk about FPIC, because when you say aware, it means that FPIC was not, you're asking if FPIC was considered or not.
I think also we need to know what FPIC is.
Okay.
I don't know if everyone in the audience is.
Okay, so I'm going to discuss about finding of brief prior informed consent in carbon projects which are conducted in our villages. And I will discuss this with 5 points. The first one being no genuine FPIC is practiced. The second one is exclusion and limited participation. The third one is rush deals. The fourth one is engaging government structures. And the last one but not least is not involving FPIC at every stage of the project. I go back to explaining number one. Number one, no genuine FPIC is being practiced. This contradicts with the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, Article 32, Section 2, which says, states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous people concerned through their own representatives, institutions, in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands. So, in the case of our people, FPIC was not observed because we have like a village committee which consists of 25 members, 7 of them being women and 18 being men. So if the village signed the contract, the village committee was the only one involved and not the majority of the community members. That leads to exclusion and limited participation of the majority of the people. And then rush deals. The two proponents, which are Soil for the Future and TNC, which is the nature conservation, push villages to sign quickly without payment, with payments of $2 per hectare, which is literally corruption. Then the other point is engaging government structures. Carbon proponents are engaging only the government structure because the village committee, that is the government structure, and not the community, not our traditional leaders. And then the last one, but not least, I said is not involving FPIC at every stage of the project. FPIC is being treated as a signature at the start of a project, where it is supposed to be a continuous at every stage of the project in planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. But in our case, it's only done in the starting. Thank you.
Thank you, Naifanoi. Yes, so it's very clear that the people are not being involved, and that there is a lot of exclusion of many parts of the community, right? Yeah, and on these contracts, maybe Joseph, I think you've seen and analyzed as a lawyer some of these contracts. So yeah, I wanted to ask you what you've seen and what your take is on what has been proposed to these communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederick, again. So after, in the course of the study, of course, I said earlier, and I think my colleague also has said, we listen to the people, and also we try to review some of the documents that were available. Important to say, it was actually very difficult to get the documentation. And that's a very serious problematic part of it. So, and before I go actually to that, it is important for everyone to understand the place we are referring into by size is almost half of Belgium, that one carbon proponent is having. And so it's a very large area. It's many villages. Actually, Volkswagen was, and actually Soil for the Future, were trying to contract, for example, in one district, more than 50 villages. And the very important aspect that we learn from the contract is like sort of like all the details in the contract are the same, except 2 things: the name of the village and the size of the village, because the village differ in size. What does this say? It says the villages do not have a bargaining power. Otherwise, they could have shaped the terms. So all the contracts are very, very similar, except the name and the size, because the villages do not participate into drafting. They just bring the contract, you have to sign. All the terms are decided by the proponent. And of course, in most of the cases, the government will come to facilitate that the village has to sign, because they use the government lawyers now to instigate the signing. And so it's the village executive officer who is the government employee. Then the government lawyer in the district council is the other person, which now my colleague has said, they're engaging government structures. But who complies is the person with the livestock, is an individual with the livestock. Second aspect from that of no bargaining power is what I said earlier about the confidentiality. It was so hard for us to get the agreement, because for a fact, even the village chairperson do not know where the contract is. So if the village chairperson, who is, in our context is the village executive officer, is the government employee, the chairperson is elected by the people. So whoever is elected by the people do not have a say, is not in possession of the agreement. So my colleague has said, for example, in the village government, is 25 people, 7 mandatory women. We asked, for example, the women, are you aware of this? Substantially, no. They are part of the village. They do not know what is being transacted into the area. But the other issue that we learn is, of course, we interviewed the people, they were saying, they told us is 3 years contract. Then what we discovered is 30 years plus 10. I don't know why they written plus 10. They could have just said 40 because it is 40. But the other things we learn, they created some sort of grievance mechanism. And into this is problematic in our case, because they went through political structure. So in the district level, because in Tanzania we have village, then the districts, then the national government. So the grievance, if you are aggrieved, for example, with the contract, you have to try to resolve within the parties, which I think is fine. It is always normal, I think. But if you are dissatisfied or you are not able to settle, what they do is you have to take one person, we call a district commissioner, who is a president appointee. And the other colleague said, we went to study about the vision because our people have been displaced because the government need money, okay? So in this particular case, an individual with less connection with the people is the person who can be appointed today and fired after maybe 2 weeks, who is not much connected, is not from that locality. At least for the district we are referring, we have never had a district commissioner from independence who is from that locality. So it's the people from some area who come to administer, then it's the one who decides. And his decision is final and conclusive. But the other thing is, when we say additionality, when we say rotate, who rotate is the pastoralist. The pastoralists are not part of the agreements, whether individually or as a community through the traditional system. They are not part of it. So it is very difficult for a pastoralist to go to court and saying, at least in line that the term of the contract has been violated. Because the simple question the court will say, are you part of this agreement? No, then you are out of it. There is, of course, some ways you can think of going to court, but at least not enforcing or protecting the agreement because you are not part of that agreement. But the other thing that we grasp from the agreements is that they provided some sort of sharing of benefits, which is very problematic in us because we said earlier that for pastoralists, cow is sacred. We are not like Indian, but we love cows so much. So is the central issue. If you, a Maasai, wake up somewhere and you meet, the first thing we'll say, all our people are fine, and our livestock and our land is only three things that she described as the Trinity. So the way now this contract is being crafted, we already said about, for example, the mobility, which does not respect our way of life, the knowledge and everything. But again, the contract, like says about the villages, which I said earlier, the other villages cannot, for example, access. The people are saying, we cannot agree. For example, some of the villages signed the agreement, and then later on come to learn they have a very big grazing area than their neighbors. The carbon program, they are saying, you cannot allow them to come to your carbon area. You cannot imagine people try now to pull out, not because their livestock are dying, because they believe their neighbors' livestock will not be able to access. This contract does not give room for getting out, at least the way we understood. And some of the village, and I can mention one, for example, known as LY, they tried to pull out. Honestly say, we did not know the impact this is going to create. It was actually entered by few people, like the village have 8,000 people, but only 55 in one meeting, and again 105 people attended and then decided on behalf of the rest. November last year, election was done in that village, and they voted out everyone who participated into entering that agreement from the village government. And what happened? They come now and say, we want to pull out. The government say, no, you cannot pull out. So this is not a voluntary carbon market, because this is what is being said, is the voluntary, but which you cannot get out of that. So is many problems in the contracts. I think the last one I can mention is in this carbon area, because if we are selling carbon, the parties contracting should know where it is being sold, who is the buyer, what's the price. Is not disclosed. The only thing is $2 per hectare at the time of entering the agreement, for which ultimately you will come and pay back through the benefit sharing, and which I say our benefit sharing, the largest part is the access, is not the money. Our people are not interested with the financial part. They're interested in access, in the freedom. Of course, even the finances are equally problematic.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, on this, I mean, generally speaking, with Carbon Project, we see that we don't know how the financial resources are split between, let's say, the project developer and the local communities, right? Yeah. So, okay, I think at this point, and we are running a bit late, it's very clear that these projects have extremely heavy consequences on the communities, that it seems to be that basically impossible also to try and raise these concerns, and that the contracts then once signed basically lock in the community for a very long time. Yeah, and given this, which is also the results of all the work that MISA has done, I wanted to ask you, Mazingoe, what are the demands then that come out of this work that you've done?
Thank you, Federica. The demands that came out of our research about carbon, first, it was, we called for moratorium of 5 years, but then the proponent did not react to that. Then we said our final demand is we do not need carbon on our land. At any cost, we do not need carbon on our land. Yeah, that is the demand.
Short and sweet. Yeah, so it's very clear that the communities don't want this, and I would like to maybe go back to Joseph now, and I would like to ask you after this report has been published with these demands, the moratorium and the stopping these projects. Have you or others engaged with the project proponents, and how did that go?
Okay, thank you. So actually, before we even went to the field, because we already learned about carbon when doing a conservation vision last year in June, July. So in September last year, we already did a bit of our homework, knowing who is behind at least and who is buying at least part of it, which is Volkswagen, for example. So in September last year, we communicated to Volkswagen, for example, telling them, this is what we are learning about carbon. It seems problematic. We don't have much detail, at least, but we need to know from you. And we had a meeting with them. This is actually in their office in Germany. That was last year. Then, from that meeting, we who are not in agreements of many of the issues, of course, but we are still discussing. So we committed ourselves that we cannot accuse someone without actual evidence, at least. So in January, we did a research. And in the course of that research, we also reached out to them, and we met in Arusha, in Tanzania. And then after, now we have developed the report. Before we published, we communicated to all carbon proponents that they know, at least to give a fair hearing, like that it will be heard to respond. One of the proponents responded, the other did not. And we're referring to Soil for the Future and Volkswagen at the same time. And thereafter, we now come to assess what he said. After we communicated and the report came out, other than trying to reflect and work on the issues that we have raised, they now change the modality of work. And how do they change? They now go to the central government to make sure that there is a top-down instruction to contract. And again, now using the government to limit anyone who wants to at least reflect and say, what is this carbon all about? So now we have changed from the situation that we were last year to a real bad situation, very antagonizing for either the village leaders who are saying no, they just want to withdraw, and then the instruction comes from above. And so it's now problematic because they are not ready to listen, they are not ready to sit, and they are not in any way showing some sign of changing. And the bad thing is, ultimately, there are people with rights whose basic rights are being violated in the name of the climate change by some people who just need the PR. That's what they need, is not really addressing the climate issues. Otherwise, they could have reduced the emission. They need the PR to show, like, oh, yes, we're emitting, but there is a place we are conserving somewhere by dismantling the social fabric of thousands of people, and for which we are not going to agree on this. We are going to push hard.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for pointing out the hypocrisy of this whole scheme, right? Where these credits would be used by companies that are continuously emitting, and they end up, destructing your social structure and yeah, they're a big threat to your way of.
Actually, one thing to say, because in the formula they say they will count the cows in the carbon area, 1, 2, 3, and the southern. Why? Because they want to make sure that the livestock will not increase in the carbon area. But of course, the car manufacturing is continuing. So someone continue not only emitting, but also getting rich as they can, but make sure that for compliance to happen, you have to remain static and develop almost the same way is really problematic and is really unfair.
Thank you for this and for these testimonies. And now, Naipanoi, just to close this panel, I wanted to ask you what your final message is to our audience today.
Thank you. And my final message goes like this. We, as the Maasai community, we believe that carbon credit projects are false climate solutions. So, Global North created this mess and they have to fix it and not import these problems into our Maasai land. We have always been protecting our environment and we will continue doing it in the future. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we can give a round of applause. And now I think we can move to the second part of our event. So we will zoom out a little bit from these specific cases in Tanzania, and we will look at the regulatory framework of carbon markets when it comes to provisions that should protect the local communities, so the communities where these projects take place, and the indigenous people. And for this, I would like to invite on stage Jonathan Crook. Jonathan is a policy lead on global carbon markets at Carbon Market Watch. And so, yeah, Jonathan, I would like to ask you if you could walk us through what the regulatory framework looks like when it comes to rules that should protect the local communities, and especially where are the gaps in these rules? Why is this happening?
Thanks very much, Federica. And I first want to thank Nasingoy, Naipanoi, and Joseph for sharing your testimonies and your recommendations and asks, which are very important to hear, especially here in Brussels. I think this is, hearing your voices is something that we don't often get in the carbon market space. And it's obviously crucial to actually hear from people who are actually impacted by these projects in a negative way. Yeah, so I think I'll try to keep my remarks short, also since I know that we're a bit tight on time. I think just today, it really shows to us that the risks and the harms are not just theoretical, right? Oftentimes it's kind of presented as we hear, that there's great safeguards, that everything will be put in place perfectly, and if there are risks, these are often presented in quite a theoretical way. But in practice, we see that there are actually real risks and they do arise, and in a way that's obviously unacceptable. And I think also what's important to note is that through the history of carbon market projects, there's a long history of abuses and of rights violations. So this goes on the voluntary carbon market, but also back to the clean development mechanism under the UN's carbon market from the Kyoto Protocol. So this is, it's not an isolated case, it's not an isolated instance, but these kind of abuses and violations have happened in the past. And I think maybe some of you may be wondering, right, why is this arising? How does this arise? And I think part of the issue is that at least we often hear that these carbon market standards, right, they have safeguards in place to ensure that these sorts of abuses and violations don't occur. The problem is that many of these safeguards, even if they sound okay on paper and some of the documentation, in practice, we see that they're not actually implemented in a way that's at all appropriate, or they're kind of a bit of a box ticking exercise where maybe it's just satisfying the compliance, but nobody's actually checking what the impact is, or nobody's looking actually into enough detail. And so I wanted to share also some findings from research that we had commissioned to University of California, Berkeley. This was focusing on REDD+ projects, so avoided deforestation, so not soil projects, but I think some of the findings still apply here because they show some critical shortcomings in the carbon market frameworks. So this research looked at 18 different REDD+ projects on the voluntary carbon market and found very big shortcomings. Effectively, many of the safeguards that are in place are very ambiguous and open-ended, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation as to how they should be implemented and actually applied. And there's many cases where the auditors, so in carbon market projects, there's meant to be a third-party auditor that verifies, are the rules being followed, are these appropriate, etc. And they found these auditors in many cases are kind of rubber stamping projects and kind of doing a bit of a box ticking exercise. So to give a few examples, in some places, emails were accepted as a form of consultation in project areas that were vast, very remote, and where there where internet connection and electricity were lacking, and yet emails were still accepted as a form of consultation. In one project in Zimbabwe, which is the Kariba project, which is now well known for a lot of scandals, but communities were informed through a newsletter. So specifically, the project developer, Carbon Green Investments, they claimed that there was zero engagement risk with the community. And this is quotes, locals have been informed about project details through the newsletter published by Carbon Green Investments. Therefore, it can be assumed that more than 50% of households living within the project area who are reliant on the project area have been consulted. So obviously completely inappropriate, but these are the kinds of examples of projects that are sometimes verified and running where safeguards have been completely ignored, or it's just a bit farcical in terms of what the content of those safeguards is. And there's other examples that I could share, but for the sake of brevity, I won't get into them here and now. I mean, just one other point I would also point to is the fact that in many of the cases also that this research looked into, history and customary land claims were largely ignored or not investigated. So in some projects, the project developers would refer to people living in the project area as squatters, and sometimes using that designation would allow them to not do the proper FPIC process. And this is obviously a huge problem. And it also speaks to the fact that in many kind of countries, right, also the designation of indigenous peoples might not always be represented or recognized in national law. And so the terms that are used can sometimes be used in a misleading way to forego the processes. Yeah, I think just very briefly, I want to talk to Article 6, the carbon market under the Paris Agreement, because as many of you might be wondering, well, the EU, right, is considering to use international carbon credits towards its climate target, which we find to be completely inappropriate for many reasons. But it's also relevant because, right, these carbon credits under this new system could have the same real risks on safeguards and for indigenous peoples and local communities that we've heard today. So there's a tool in place under this new carbon market for the UN, which is meant to have safeguards in place. Which again, on paper, it has precautionary and do no harm principles, but the risk is that in practice, these may not be upheld. There's no projects yet up and running, but we already see that some of the way that the language is worded can be problematic. I think notably, it encourages that there should be no involuntary resettlement, but it doesn't require this. So there's no, they have not forbidden involuntary resettlement, which is completely obviously inappropriate for any project. And yeah, there's also been a concerning development recently with this in this UN carbon market, where they now, for the safeguards that they have in place, they're now proposing that there can be deviations to the safeguards rules. So essentially not taking into account the safeguard rules in cases where there are unavoidable negative impacts. And that's not yet been defined. So obviously and there will be more work to define what that is, but effectively they're defining possible ways to get out of applying safeguards based on kind of unclear, ambiguous criteria. So I think I just want to conclude here to say that, obviously the risks are very real, not just theoretical, and they're can manifest and do manifest. And the safeguards that we have in place on car markets are not working. They're not delivering as they should. And obviously that's an unacceptable outcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think the picture is very clear for our audience, and thank you also for mentioning the 2040 target discussions, because what we heard today, I think it hits home closer than we could think, right? Because with these discussions, and if then the EU proceeds and then will include these Article 6 credits to be used towards our 2040 target, then we would literally have our money being spent on projects that not only don't benefit the local communities, but they also risk harming them. And yeah, I think that would be extremely outrageous. And I'm happy we could put some light on this. And I want to thank our audience, both here and online, for listening to us. I want to thank again our panelists and speakers. And I think now we can open the floor for questions or discussion.
Oh, can I just ask?
They have.
Yeah, there's a microphone coming.
Hi, I'm a journalist from Carbon Pulse. Thank you so much for your testimonies. I think it was very enlightening for me. I was just wondering, are there any situations where carbon credits, such as these, like soil carbon, can actually be effective? And are there any examples that you could provide? Maybe I know in this specific situation, it really didn't work out, and it's obviously not a good project, but are there any instances where this can work?
I think, Jonathan, you might have a...
I don't have any particular project in mind, but I think we can obviously we should heed the call of the Maasai colleagues here on the very real risks that are rising with these two projects. And I think there should be important lessons to take forward, of course.
Yes, I think we could maybe even take a few questions.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to offer a partial response maybe to that question. I think there's been a recent, well, it sounded like positive news coming from Latin America from an organization called Savimbo, which is a bottom-up approach where the whole approach has been developed together with indigenous peoples in the Amazon, I think. And they are also selling carbon credits, and it's apparently working well until now.
Thank you. I just want to comment on that because I'm following them online. I think what they're doing is biodiversity credits.
Also,
mostly. Okay, but I think we didn't discuss biodiversity credits, but I know that Joseph, you did some research on that. Also, might be interesting to link the development of carbon credits to the coming developments of biodiversity credits. At least this is also coming. Maybe it's something that Joseph could address.
Okay. So after studying carbon, we have had conservation, and it has been a really, if you say conservation, it sounds so good and you like it because you think it's about the nature and the animals. Sadly, it is never that. It is a way of occupying land by other people by uprooting the original people of that particular area. At least this is in Tanzania. we have been experiencing like systemic eviction over the last 70 years in the name of conservation, and bringing the shooters, the people with guns, to come and protect the wildlife by hunting. So you bring a hunter, you displace all the pastoralists, saying, oh, they are endangering the nature, and we need to protect the calving. And then who protect is the person with the guns, whose business is paying hunt. That is not protecting, that is killing. So is so much lies coming into what was to be a very brilliant idea of conserving the lands. Then we come to the wildlife. So after the carbon, we again now learn into what they call biodiversity credits or wildlife credits. Then something crazy happens because they also have what they call additionality. And for them, for additionality to happen, there must be a less contact between human and wildlife and less disturbance, okay? And for them, you know, we pastoralists, like, for example, the cow, you put the cowbell so that you can hear where the cow is. Okay, maybe you are just walking and you want to know where are your livestock, so you have to follow the bell. So they say the bell disturbs the wildlife, so it's less credit. The interaction between human or the livestock with the wildlife is the less credit. So what does this propagate is you have to distance, you have to get out, literally. But again, at least in the area that we have learned that this wildlife credit happens, hunting is allowed, does not affect the credit. So ironical. So you can shoot, of course, the animals will not fear the sound of the gun, but they fear the sound of a cowbell, okay? Which does not kill, does not harm. It has been there over the years. So, you know, I think you said rightly, you know, many things happen so good on paper. There are some which are crazy even on paper, like that disconnection, like, oh, less connection at the credit. In our perspective is you have to get out. The same thing that conservation has done for the last 70 years. Now carbon, because it's again related to climate. You know, if you say, oh, we want to address the climate change, everyone see, yes, because climate change is real. So we need to address. But what comes with good ideas is always executed in a very, very bad way. So, for example, what you said about Zimbabwe is so real that they say they try to circumvent some procedure to make sure that they disconnect people who live on the land. How can we say that they don't have history of connection? We have to invent some ways, like even Tanzania, they say, oh, they are not indigenous people, as if that concept is the one attaching us. We have been there before the law, at least these written laws, before modern governments. So wildlife credit, so is good because it's about the wildlife. The moment you say you create additionality by disconnecting, in our context is displacement, is dispossession. And the area that the wildlife are, you know, the wildlife, particularly in our context, where zebra graze is where our livestock graze. They don't feel shy to one another. They are not enemies. Our cows can mix with the elephants, okay? The only kind of animals that we have to be a bit careful is the lion, the predators. And it's not only our cows, even the zebra fears them. So it's not like they are only dangerous to our cows, they are also dangerous to others, but it's part of the ecosystem that was not brought, at least by the colonial system or by law. It has been part of the nature. We are not tired, at least, of coexisting with the wildlife. What we are tired of is some theories invented from crazy different part of the world. That you said something about bottom up, that come from above, always imported solution. Never tested, literally. They are like assumed somewhere, and then maybe this is going to work. Is not going to work. Is going to dismantle social fabric. Is going to dismantle traditional knowledge. Why do we if you go to Maasai areas, if an elephant come and say a child like 4 years say, "Mama, there is an elephant here," the mama will not run because he's always passing, so he's not a dangerous creature. Okay, so okay, be careful. They know, even the kids knows about them. It's not like some different part of the world. Like if you say there is elephant, then everyone run as if it's a very dangerous creature all the time. These people has the knowledge. They know, of course, this animal harm, but not always. Maybe there is a reason. And then, this kind of solution do not respect, not necessarily education that we got from these universities of this world, tested over centuries and is working. Like what my colleague has said, for example, the malignant cattle fever is a very, very fatal disease. So when you say disconnect, there is a time we disconnect for a purpose. Okay, we know it. When malignant came, all our livestock will die. So what do? We don't chase the wildlife. We don't chase the wildebeest. We go away with our cows. Until 16 days of April, we came back because we know the disease ended yesterday. You will never go to the university of this world and tell you when this disease is going to end. We know it ends on 16 April, not 15, 16 April. We know it. Our grandfathers knew, everyone in Maasai knows. And if you lose your livestock through contaminating this disease, the Maasai will never give you, because we have a tendency of people who lose the livestock will give back. We will never give you because it's the disease you ought to have known. You are reckless. Okay? So there is a time we disconnect, there is a time we don't. But the wildlife credit is not a solution for this.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's important to know the use of these credits, right? Both in the case of the carbon and the biodiversity. I'm way less familiar with biodiversity, but it claims to compensate for damage that is done somewhere else. And the real solution is not to damage in the first place, not to.
Something important, I think. If we, for example, hunting in our areas, they say, we are allowing hunting so that we pay back to the burden of the people who are killing by coexisting. But what happened is they displace the people to allow the hunters to come in. The same way the wildlife credit is happening, the same way carbon is doing, the same way conservation is doing, because this is not the people's decision, is some other idea.
Thank you. I think we have a question. And also.
Hello, I'm Sabine Frank, also from Carbon Market Watch. Thank you very much for your testimonies. You have said a number of things that have piqued my curiosity. You said the Maasai people are offered $2 per hectare upfront, but otherwise you don't know where the money goes. So there is financial intransparency. You also said that the project developers always approach the central government and make sure that the instructions for concluding the contracts filter from the bottom down, that there is pressure exerted from the bottom down on the communities. That leads me to the question, have you been able to question your regional or central government to say how much money is there in these contracts for them, how much of a source of income it actually is? And question number two, we recently had the African Climate Summit. Were any of you there? Have you heard what your governments said on this occasion about carbon market projects, and how do you feel about it if it applies? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to answer first?
I think it's already two questions. I don't know if okay. No, please go on. I'll just them all together.
Perfect. Because actually I had a similar question to the one you asked, so that's great. And I also wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more, so how like climate change is already impacting your way of life, and how you're like going about also maybe changing your practices to adapt to these new realities as well yourself. Thank you.
And we also have a couple of questions online. So when we're done with these, we can go to those.
Who would like to answer these questions?
Thank you for your question. I think I'll have to answer her question first. And we can ask yours. You're asking about how shall we change our ways of pastoralist keeping to adapt to the climate change, right? And I mentioned earlier that we consider climate change not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow. This happened many years ago and it's continuing to happen. That is why we have the strategic mobility. This mobility, it is a way of responding to climate change. Yeah.
Okay, I think several questions. So we said $2 per hectare. And this money is to induce people literally to sign. And you know, in this world, there are always those crazy people with interested in money. Okay. So even here in Belgium, if they come, there are always some people interested in getting something contrary to procedures. So the $2 is the money they say, if you sign, not necessarily that how much carbon storage or sinking is happening, you get $2. And this will make many people to run because it's as if it's the free money and it's never free. But we say it's top down. So what do they do? Actually, before they reach that village with the $2, they mostly engage the central government and the district government. And it is where now they learn where is the land formed, okay? That they will go for the targets. Is people coming around, they never know existence of that land anyway. So they go down now to the village with the people from the district governments. They never go literally alone. And it is then that they bring this idea to the local government, to the village government down. But you ask, like, have you, for example, tried to raise this issue to your government? Which I think is a very, very serious and good question. Then I think someone need to understand the circumstance that we are operating. In the last 4 years, at least, we are three here. 3 of us is from a place known as Loliondo. People were displaced, shot, create a place for a hunter. Okay? Is never engaged, shoot. You can Google in the internet. 41 people were shot in 2022 to create a place for hunters. In the place that we are from, I and her, for the last, again, 4 years, government cut off social service completely. Not health, not education, nothing. Not budgeted money that you can buy this glass for 4 years. And they say, for you to get out. So what I'm saying is not a government that is able to engage. That's why we're here trying to push from different parts of the world for them to understand. And we think if many actors understands, stop financing those theories, maybe they can understand. And Climate Week, when we are here, some of our colleagues were in US to attend the Climate Week. So yes, we are trying also to make sure that we are everywhere, trying also to follow and listen what they do. I think it responds to that. And then for the climate change, how the Maasai adapt, I think I agree. We have our traditional ways because we are not on denial that there is no climate change. We have to face it. We have to find some way to address. At least in the Maasai context, because at least for emission, we are not emitters seriously in the context like Volkswagen and others. We are not close to that. But we try to make sure that we respond. And she said rightly, one of it is to make sure that we have, for example, certain area we reserve for some times. So when we run against the wildebeest, is not only the wildebeest, is area that we also come back in the dry season. So we have, for example, the place that we only graze small stock like the cows and ailing livestock. We have some areas that we go only for a certain occasion, maybe for the mineral purpose alone. We go for a week. Then because we know we'll come back in the dry season. So this movement is meant to allow the recovery. That's very important. So when you move from, because sometimes we are being told, why are you crazily moving in the 21st century? Why are you still nomadic? And they feel nomadism is a backward system. It's not. It's a way to respond to the demands of the nature. So you are in point A to allow point B and C to be better. Then you move to that to allow point A to regenerate again. But it's not crazy rotation. You know, they feel like you have to be like in a cycle. No, we move strategically with a purpose. And
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have
Okay, we have some questions online first, so the people online don't feel left out, and then we can come back to the audience. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, so online we have a question about what are the needs of the Maasai community instead of carbon credits and carbon offsets. What are the actual needs of the Maasai community from the outside world? And there's a question here also about that these projects are targeting, according to this, some 50 villages in Tanzania. What happens if a lot of the villages sign on, but some don't want to sign on? What happens to those villages that don't sign on? Will they be de facto, for example, roped into the projects? And there's a question about Article 6, about the Sustainable Development Tool, whether the Sustainable Development Tool would help like avoid the kinds of issues that are facing the Maasai in future projects or not. Is it sufficient for the task? And I think you've already covered this, how you intend to adjust your land use to deal with the climate crisis as the Maasai people.
who would like to answer to these questions?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe if I had your question where you were asking what happens if one village signs and maybe the other one did not sign.
Yeah, or if like a mass of villages, like say 2/3 of the villages sign, but a third doesn't. You know, I guess they might be in the middle of the territories under the project. So what happens to them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Actually, that is the main problem because it creates conflict between the villages. And usually, as our way of life, we collaborate. When it rains to a village, we can bring our livestock to this village. But now, when you sign the contract, the case became different because actually the livestock are being counted. So the village that did not sign, they are not allowed to bring livestock to your village. So actually it brings a lot of conflicts. And that's why we don't want it in our land. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think on the question of how you adjust, I think that was already responded, that you are in touch with the environment around you and you move based on these environmental factors. I think there was also a question on the SD tool and Article 6. I think, Jonathan, you might briefly answer, and then I am afraid we have to close because we are already quite late.
And there's also the question I think is relevant about what the outside world should be doing for the Maasai.
We can close with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in Article 6.4, the Sustainable Development Tool, which is where safeguards are embedded in this new carbon market under the UN. I think as I was hinting at in my remarks, there are some rules on paper that seem decent, right? And the rules are supposed to apply, supposed to be a minimum bar irrespective of national legislation. But as I mentioned, involuntary resettlement is not forbidden under the SD tool, so that means that that may still occur. And like I mentioned as well, again, there's rules on FPIC, but as we've heard also today, sometimes FPIC is kind of a box ticking exercise, or it's done in the initial phase and not done in a repeated ongoing process. And then in particular, I already spoke to this point about they're considering to allow deviations to safeguards in certain circumstances which are still undefined. So I think that it's not clear yet where the 6.4 will land on safeguards, but there are definitely big risks that we can already see. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we have the last question from online. Could you repeat the question, Khaled?
Yeah, the question is, since carbon market projects in your cases are definitely not working, what would work for you? What can the outside world do to support your way of life, to help you improve and adapt and all that?
I think it's nice if you all have a chance to respond to this. Thank you for that question. The outside world, first, they should adapt to our ways of conservation. We have our own Maasai conservation vision, which will be the guideline for their programs, projects, and whatever they want to do. Everything that they want to do should be pipelined in the conservation vision. We will share it with you, and it is already available in our MISA website. Also, another thing that I wanted to say to the outside world is that we have used the Maasai land as a laboratory for several years. 70 years for laboratory as a fortress conservation. If it will work or it doesn't work. And it worked. Then now we want to use it as a laboratory for soil carbon. Yet in the global north, we have so many areas, so many farms that are available, which have been used to cultivate by using chemicals. Then why don't they use the same area in the land to sink the carbon? Because we believe that soil needs carbon to be enriched. Then they should use the degraded soil on their land for the carbon. Then finally, if civilization it means living one's indigenous knowledge and practices, then Maasai, we will never be civilized because we embraced our traditional knowledge and system. Thank you.
Thank you. Panoi, do you want to answer this, or we can go to Joseph?
Okay, I think much can be done. Carbon is coming as part of the world response to climate change. And I think the most important things that whoever is listening, we should try to focus on true solution, not this meandering of compliance without complying. So if the issue is emission, let's tell the people to stop emitting. Not saying we are conserving a place in Africa. Why not here? The Maasai community is very important for everyone to know. We are in Belgium here. The Maasai have already lost the land by size equal to Belgium. 30,000 square kilometers on what they call conservation. Completely uprooted. And then they still coming and saying, oh, you have to comply. We need to be very honest. Whoever is listening, tell them, let's find right solution. Let's try to practice here. That's very important. Second, we should stop financing wrong solution. Because for a fact, it's not only the Maasai who are going to be impacted. Nature is going is not going to benefit because it's the wrong solution. Okay? So you just keep like rotating the livestock all the time. You are not adding anything, any value to the ecology, to the nature. But someone get the PRR. He get the certificates. They never care about the real impacts of climate. They care about a paper known as a certificate. That I'm complying somewhere. We should be true to them, saying we don't need the paper. We need actual compliance. This is very, very important. But I think my colleague has said we have provided sort of a roadmap saying, because we have been always asked, you are anti-conservation. We said, okay, we can conserve, but that conservation should not take away our land right, should respect our culture. So we welcome any, anyone can find some way to collaborate, but there are basic tenets that are minimum standard that we are going to agree. Nothing should take our land right. We have lost enough. We are thinking of how we can regain. We are not prepared to lose an inch in, because someone said, which I forgot earlier saying, when a Maasai person, for example, cut a tree, like maybe we collect firewood, but we don't cut from the trunk because we know the nature cares us. We know our meetings happens under the shed. We know we use the herbs as our treatment. Okay? There was no, the place I was referring as our home. The government limiting access to services. 4 years. How are we treating our people? Of course, either you go far following the hospitals, or most of the time you use the herbs. So we know the value of the land. We know the value of taking care of the nature. It always comes back to you. So they should listen why it was possible for us to coexist. This is very important. We should stop importing some bad ideas and always doing some experiments some years somewhere, and then after some years, this is not working. We invent the other because we don't listen. It's very important to listen to the people. They might not be in these universities, but they're so intelligent. They know the land, they know its values, they know what the land can give, and they value that. And I think that is very important to understand.
Thank you. And we have a last point from Naipanoi.
Yeah. Mine is simple and clear, and it goes like this. What works for you as the global north doesn't work for us. So please allow us to continue with our traditional way of life. We are happy with it. We are proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, speakers, again, and thank you to the audience, both here and online.